It was a feeling of dread that settled in my stomach the moment I stepped into the HR office. A chill ran down my spine when I saw Mason seated there. A faint scent of his cheap cologne hanging in the air. A chemical fog against the clean glass. Friday morning, the day before my wedding, I was still wrapped in the cheerful haze of wedding planning. I was wearing a simple sweatshirt that read Bride-to-be and sipping coffee from a mug that proudly declared Future Mrs. Davies. Cute, right? Only nothing about what followed was cute at all. Mason didn't even look up at first, just pretended to shuffle some documents on his desk, as if this were a casual, quarterly check-in and not the executive equivalent of a sudden ambush. When he finally lifted his gaze, he offered a plastic, insincere grin, the kind of smile people wear when they are about to deliver a painful blow while calling it a favor. "We've decided to let you go," he said, his voice flat, as if he were just commenting on a canceled Postmates order. "Let me go?" I blinked at him, completely unable to process the words. "It's not a personal decision," he quickly added. "It's just a matter of budget timing. You know how it is." Oh, I knew exactly how it was. My annual bonus, a sum of $27,000 before tax, but still a significant amount, was scheduled to be paid out at midnight the following day. If I had just 24 more hours, I would have had that money locked in. Mason knew it. HR knew it. Even the intern who saw me crying in the parking garage probably knew it. This wasn't a budget issue. This was premeditated theft with a PowerPoint alibi. Anyway, I just sat there for a moment, trying to comprehend the nuclear-level audacity. Mason kept talking, something about restructuring and difficult decisions, how he had fought for me, but his hands were tied. I didn't hear most of it. I was staring at the man who had just torched my dignity like it was a piece of scrap paper in a barrel fire. I didn't cry. Not there, not then. I just nodded, signed the papers they slid in front of me, my signature so tight and angry it looked like a seismograph mid-quake. I walked out without a word. Not a single one. In the elevator, I stared at my reflection. My eyes red, jaw clenched, heart somewhere between wanting to run and wanting to burn everything down. I was supposed to be heading to the final dress fitting, picking up last-minute decorations, confirming the DJ had our do not play list ready. But instead, I was holding a manila folder full of severance paperwork and a complimentary slap in the face from corporate America. What hit me the hardest wasn't the money. Not exactly. It was the calculation, the cold arithmetic of betrayal. Mason had waited until the absolute last possible moment to do this. Friday morning, just before a holiday weekend, just before my wedding. Just late enough to ruin everything, but just early enough to escape any legal heat. It wasn't personal, he said, but it was incredibly precise. I got into my car and just sat there, the engine running. No music, no phone calls, just me and the hum of the air conditioner and the sound of my future self screaming through the windshield. I wasn't about to let this ruin my wedding. Not for Mason, not for his petty ego or his spreadsheet sins. But I wasn't about to let this slide either. Not yet. Not loudly. But the fuse had been lit, and when it finally burned down, it wouldn't be me standing in the ashes. It would be Mason. Our rehearsal dinner was held at this luxurious banquet hall that smelled like eucalyptus and expensive perfume. Everyone kept hugging me like I was made of porcelain, clinking glasses and saying things like, "This is your weekend, sweetheart," while I sat there, smiling with my face and dying behind my ribs. They didn't know. Nobody did. Not my mom, who was already tipsy on the house Chardonnay and crying into her caprese salad about how I finally found a good one. Not my best friend, Jessica, who was also my maid of honor and was currently interrogating the caterers over the shrimp-to-cocktail sauce ratio. Not even Ethan, my fiancé, who kept shooting me little winks like we were sharing a private joke. I hadn't told him. I couldn't. Not now. Not while he was grinning like a golden retriever in a tuxedo, surrounded by people who loved him and wanted this day to be perfect. I wasn't going to splatter my corporate trauma all over the hors d'oeuvres. Jessica slid into the seat next to me, mid-salad, and leaned in. You okay? I smiled too fast. Just nerves. She squinted at me. You sure? You've got that look again. What look? I asked. I'm mentally writing a hit list and it starts with the woman from accounting look. I laughed. It sounded like a fork snapping in half. I'm fine, Jess. I promise. She gave me a long look but dropped it. The wine was flowing, a band was tuning up, and the night moved on without me. Meanwhile, I was in survival mode, smiling when people raised their glasses, laughing at inside jokes I barely heard, playing the part of the glowing bride-to-be, while quietly replaying Mason's voice in my head like some kind of psychotic mantra. It's not personal, just timing. Around 10 p.m., I ducked into the powder room and locked the door behind me. I sat on the marble counter in my stupid white rehearsal dress and pulled up the PDF of my contract on my phone. I found the clause in less than a minute. Bonus payout. Annual vesting on the first Saturday of May. Termination prior to that date results in forfeiture. Mason hadn't just fired me. He had waited, stalked the clock like a vulture with a calendar. There was no budget meeting, no financial emergency. He had this locked and loaded for weeks, probably longer. I could see him now, hunched over his keyboard in that glass-walled office, cackling to himself like a dollar store Bond villain, watching my bonus accrue and licking his lips. And that's when the clarity came, cold and clean like winter air. I wasn't going to ruin my wedding by setting this blaze tonight, but I wasn't going to forget it either. Outside, through the window, I could see the twinkle lights over the patio. Ethan was laughing with his dad, Robert Davies, the CEO of Davies Enterprises, the reason my old firm even had a fourth quarter. A man who wore power like cologne and could tank stock prices with a single sentence. He adored Ethan, respected me, and still thought I was the regional analytics lead at a firm that gave a damn. And I hadn't told him yet. Not because I was scared, but because when you hold a card that dangerous, you don't just play it. You place it quietly. Precisely. When everyone's watching, when it'll hurt the most. I slid off the counter, smoothed my dress, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes didn't look numb anymore. They looked sharp, surgical. Tomorrow, I'd walk down the aisle. I'd kiss Ethan, dance under a canopy of fairy lights, and pretend none of this happened. But something had shifted. I wasn't the porcelain bride anymore. I was something else entirely. The wedding was perfect, which pissed me off more than anything. Sunshine like a postcard. Vows delivered without stuttering. Ethan crying just enough to make my mom sob into her Spanx. Not a single disaster. No lipstick on teeth, no exes lurking in the bushes. The cake didn't collapse. The DJ actually stuck to the playlist. Even my Aunt Carla didn't bring up her latest MLM. But under all that tall and curated joy, I was carrying something sharp. Every time someone said, "You must be over the moon," I smiled and thought about Mason signing my termination paperwork with that smug little grin. I still played the role. I posed. I twirled. I clinked champagne glasses and kissed Ethan like I wasn't silently crafting a murder fantasy involving a fax machine and a stapler. I was determined not to let him steal one more thing from me. It wasn't until dessert that I finally found myself standing near the edge of the dance floor with a slice of wedding cake in one hand and a flute of something sparkling in the other. Robert Davies was next to me, nursing a scotch, and watching Ethan try and fail to do the worm with his groomsmen. Robert is a man who speaks in bottom lines, trim suit, eyes like spreadsheets. Everything he says sounds like it belongs in a quarterly earnings call, but I've always liked him. He respects women with strong opinions and better data. That night, he looked relaxed for once. His tie was loosened, and he was laughing under his breath at his son's tragic attempts at rhythm. "You pulled off quite the party," he said, nodding toward the string lights and sweaty dance floor. I took a bite of the cake. Almond and raspberry, sweet enough to make my teeth ache. "I got fired yesterday," I said. I don't know why I said it then. Maybe because I was tired of carrying it. Maybe because I wanted one person in the room to see the full picture, even if I didn't ask them to do anything with it. Robert turned his head slowly, like a hawk tracking a mouse. "Come again?" he said. "Mason fired me Friday morning. Claimed it was a budget issue. My bonus was supposed to vest Saturday, 27 grand. I sipped the champagne. "Nice timing, huh?" He didn't blink, just stared at me for a moment, long and calculating. No sympathy, no gasps, just gears turning behind his eyes. "And you didn't tell Ethan?" "Not yet. I didn't want to ruin this." He looked back out at the dance floor. Ethan had transitioned from worming to air guitaring a Journey solo. A proud moment. Robert swirled his scotch, took a sip, and said, "I'll make a note." That was it. Just those 4 words. I didn't ask for help. I didn't beg him to intervene. It wasn't some damsel in distress waiting for her corporate father-in-law to slay the dragon. I just needed to say it out loud, to mark it, to make it real outside my own head. But Robert Davies doesn't make a note like a secretary scribbling on a post-it. When he makes a note, someone gets audited. We stood there in silence for another minute. The bass from the DJ booth rattled our glasses. Someone shouted, "Shots near the bar!" A photographer scurried past us, chasing the flower girl and her frosting-stained hands. Then Robert clinked his glass against mine and gave me the smallest nod. For the first time since Friday morning, I felt something warm rise in my chest. Not hope, exactly. Something more dangerous. Possibility. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't need to. I'd said my piece. Now the game had changed. The Monday after the wedding, Mason strolled into the office like he had just cured cancer with a spreadsheet. He brought donuts. That was his tell. Mason never brings donuts unless he's done something shady and needs to bribe morale. Jelly-filled hush money. Bavarian cream-coated guilt. He walked around the bullpen like a game show host, tossing powdered sugar grenades and grinning like he hadn't gutted an employee for the fiscal high score. "Sometimes leadership means making hard calls," he said loudly near the coffee machine. "But I just saved this department 30 grand. That's how you stay lean, people." Backslaps, awkward chuckles, a few raised eyebrows. No one knew the full story. Just whispers that I was let go right before the wedding. Bad optics, sure, but Mason spun it like I had prioritized personal life over deliverables. He even told a few folks I'd been phasing out for months. That one made Susan from billing raise an eyebrow so high it nearly filed for transfer. But then the tremors started, small at first, like tiny cracks forming in the dam. Accounting got an email from the VP of Finance, marked urgent, requesting a full audit of all vendor expenditures tied to Davies Enterprises. Every invoice, every contract, every billing discrepancy for the last 18 months. Legal was pulled into back-to-back meetings, huddled behind closed doors with tired eyes and too many red pens. HR suddenly started reviewing all termination files from Q2, asking clarifying questions and requesting copies of Slack threads. People noticed. People always notice. Offices are petri dishes of paranoia wrapped in recycled air and artificial light. By Wednesday, Mason was sweating in meetings and snapping at the intern over font sizes. On Thursday, 2 guys from corporate compliance showed up without warning, and their presence felt radioactive. No one said my name, not out loud, but I was the ghost in the Google Sheets, the shadow in the break room reflections. They all knew something had happened. They just didn't know what. And me? I was at home, honeymoon postponed, hair still full of bobby pins and stubborn glitter. I sat in Ethan's hoodie, drinking lukewarm coffee and refreshing the company org chart like it was a true crime subreddit. Watching, waiting. Jessica texted me Thursday night. "Did you hear about Mason's budget meeting getting canceled last minute?" Me. "Nope. Why?" Jessica. "Because legal took over the conference room and kicked everyone out." The CFO's assistant was crying. "Something's up." I wanted to say I know, but I didn't. I hadn't spoken to Robert since the reception. Hadn't followed up. No calls. No cryptic emails. Just silence. But not the kind that means nothing. The kind that means something's loading. It felt surreal watching my old workplace scramble from the outside, like a snow globe someone had dropped. I should have felt satisfaction, vindication. Instead, I felt a slow, simmering tension, like I was sitting on the front porch, watching storm clouds crawl across the sky, knowing damn well I forgot to tie down the patio furniture. Mason thought he'd won. Thought he'd saved a buck and padded his performance review. Thought he could gut people with a smile and a spreadsheet, and the world would keep spinning like he was a hero. But Mason didn't understand two things. Not every move gets logged in the employee portal, and you never, ever mess with someone whose father-in-law could buy your job title for sport. The tremors were just the beginning. The quake was coming. The envelope was thick, heavy, like a wedding invite, but without the gold foil and self-congratulations. It arrived Thursday afternoon, hand-delivered by a courier who looked too nervous to be dropping off stationery. No return address, just my name, printed in bold serif across the front like a challenge. Inside was a formal invitation to the Davies Enterprises Annual Strategy Summit, embossed in navy and silver. RSVP already marked confirmed, and the details stood out. Seat reserved. Front row, section marked executive guests. I sat on the couch holding the card like it might explode if I blinked too hard. Ethan peeked over my shoulder. "Dad invited you, apparently." He grinned. "You're in the big leagues now." I smiled back, but my stomach coiled. This wasn't a courtesy invite. This wasn't nepotism or politeness. This was placement. Robert Davies doesn't do anything halfway. Doesn't reserve front row seats for decoration. If you're in his line of sight, you're either part of the scene or the shot. The summit was scheduled for Monday. The venue, a downtown hotel with valet-only parking and chandeliers that looked like upside-down galaxies. I'd attended the summit once before, last year, with a name tag and a coffee-stained blazer, standing in the back with other analytics managers, pretending to be invisible while execs clinked glasses and swapped lies. This year, I'd be in the front row. Not as an employee, not even as a guest. As a statement. I didn't ask Robert for details. I didn't text or email or fish for breadcrumbs. Part of me didn't want confirmation. I didn't want hope. Hope is messy. It leaves room for disappointment. I just marked the date in my calendar, picked out a blazer sharp enough to draw blood, and booked a blowout appointment. If I was going to be a chess piece, I was going to be the queen. Jessica called me Friday night. "Are you really going? Already RSVP'd. What do you think it means?" I hesitated. "I think it means Mason's about to find out what 27 grand actually costs." She whistled low. "You are terrifying. I love it." The weekend passed slow. Too slow. Every email from my old job felt like a crack in a dam. Jessica sent screenshots. Mason asking for PR language on unexpected vendor decisions, HR requesting clarification on termination protocols. I didn't reply. I just watched it all unfold like a chess match. I wasn't playing, but somehow winning. Ethan didn't ask questions. That was his gift. He knew when silence wasn't just silence, but strategy. Monday morning, I dressed with the precision of a sniper. Black slacks, a navy blazer, simple earrings, and my wedding ring gleaming like a badge. I walked into that hotel like I belonged there, because whether they liked it or not, I did. The lobby buzzed with suits and lanyards, badges flashing like nervous smiles. Familiar faces from my old company were there, laughing too loud, drinking too early. I saw Mason across the room, holding court near the espresso bar, gesturing with that same smug hand he used when firing people who didn't matter. He didn't see me. Not yet. But he would. Because my seat was front row, center aisle, directly across from the podium. The arena was set, the audience was ready, and Robert Davies hadn't even stepped on stage yet. The cocktail hour was held in a gilded ballroom that smelled like old money and fresh ambition. Waiters floated through the crowd with tiny crab cakes on slabs of black slate, and somewhere near the string quartet, a woman in a pantsuit was laughing so hard she snorted champagne. I stood alone at the edge of the VIP section, sipping club soda with a lime I didn't ask for, watching the room throb with self-importance. Lanyards, logos, legacy. The people I used to report to were here, nursing bourbons and inflated titles, all pretending they knew what the hell was coming next quarter. That's when Jessica texted me. "You'll love this. Mason just told the CTO you were emotional dead weight, and that firing you proved he wasn't afraid to make tough calls." I stared at the screen, the words punching a cold hole in my ribs. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I could have marched across the ballroom and ripped him apart, syllable by syllable, in front of his precious stakeholders, but I didn't. I put my phone away and took another sip. Let him brag. Let him preen. Let him smile and bask and believe for one more hour that he was still the wolf and not the carcass. From across the room, I saw Mason mid-laugh, gesturing with a glass of red wine like he was conducting an orchestra of his own ego. Two guys from sales nodded along, clearly trying to ride his coattails to whatever promotion was left floating in the rubble. He didn't see me yet, but others did. Karen from data engineering spotted me first, blinking like I was a glitch in the matrix. Then Paul from marketing, the guy who always wore sneakers with suits and thought that made him edgy. Their eyes trailed from me to my name tag, silver, not paper, then to the placard in my hand, VIP reserved. I could feel the whispers spreading like spilled ink. Is that... Didn't she get fired? Why is she here? The room had no idea how to process me. I wasn't supposed to be in this section. I wasn't supposed to exist in this ecosystem anymore. I was the woman who disappeared quietly, without a scene, just a line in an email and a cleared-out desk. And yet, here I was, in tailored wool and steady heels, not clinging to relevance, but radiating a calculated presence. I felt like a warning label no one wanted to read. Somewhere between the foie gras and the tiny mushroom tarts, the room began to tilt. You couldn't see it if you weren't looking, but I was looking. The smiles got tighter, the glances stickier. People started checking their phones more often. The CTO ducked out early. The VP of Ops took her third glass of wine like it was medicine. And Mason? Mason basked. He bragged about his lean team strategy, about cutting unnecessary overhead just in time for Q2. He even made a crack, loud enough for Jessica to overhear, about how weddings don't pay bills but open headcount does. A joke about me. The silence I held inside wasn't passive. It was alive, coiled tight like a snake waiting for a neck. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew who was giving the keynote. I knew what seat I'd been placed in. I knew why Robert Davies had said nothing since that night under the fairy lights and wedding cake. And I knew Mason had just built his gallows out of words he couldn't take back. So I said nothing, not a word, just sipped my drink and watched the house of cards tremble, brick by lying brick. The lights dimmed just enough to hush the room. The air turned heavy with anticipation. the way it does right before a lightning storm, charged, crackling, too still to trust. People finished their drinks in nervous gulps. The string quartet melted into silence. Phones were silenced without being asked. Everyone turned toward the stage. Robert Davies stepped up to the podium like a man with nowhere to be but exactly where he was. He wore a charcoal gray suit so sharp it could have drawn blood, and a watch you don't buy, you inherit. His presence was quiet, absolute, like gravity. The company's CEO sat 2 chairs to the left of the stage. I'd met him once. Blow-dried hair, watchful eyes, the kind of man who treats everyone like a potential liability until proven otherwise. He smiled at Robert as if they were still allies. That smile didn't reach his eyes. Robert adjusted the mic, cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was calm, measured, the kind of tone that makes auditors sweat and boards lean forward. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "I'd like to thank our hosts for another well-executed summit. I see many familiar faces in the room. Partners, colleagues, even family. I sat in the front row, spine straight, heart ticking like a metronome, unreadable behind my composed half-smile. From this angle, I could see everything. The CEO's restless hands. Mason leaning on a high-top table in the back like he owned oxygen. My old department leads clustered near the side, fidgeting with lanyards like school kids caught skipping class. Robert continued, strolling through the expected beats, market trends, digital transformation, agile resilience. It was corporate lullaby stuff, just enough to keep the room nodding without truly hearing. And then he paused, a breath, a stillness, and the world shifted. "That said," Robert said, his voice flattening into something colder, "Davies Enterprises is making a strategic shift in our operations and supplier relationships. After a thorough internal review and in alignment with our updated values framework," people blinked, sat straighter. "Effective immediately, Davies Enterprises will be terminating its contract with Stratton and Chase." Silence. Then noise. Not one loud sound, but 1,000 small ones. Shuffling. Throats clearing. The ripple of panic disguised as confusion. The CEO jerked his head up, his mouth twitching toward a rebuttal he hadn't rehearsed. Mason, halfway through a sip of whatever overpriced bourbon he'd been flexing, froze. His glass paused midair like time had stuttered. "We no longer trust the leadership decisions being made at Stratton," Robert added. "And as such, we no longer believe our interests are best served by this partnership." He didn't look at anyone in particular, but he didn't have to. Everyone looked at Mason. His face went slack, like someone had unplugged the animatronic smugness and left the husk behind. Somewhere near the catering table, a fork clattered to the floor. I saw Paul from marketing slowly turn toward me, eyes wide. His mouth formed a wordless O. Phones came out. Texts started firing. I saw someone in the back tap their smartwatch like they were checking vitals. The CEO stood abruptly, moved toward the stage. Robert raised one hand just slightly. Not aggressive, not loud, but final. "We thank Stratton and Chase for their years of service," he said, "and we wish them clarity and accountability in the months ahead." Then he stepped back from the mic. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. He just walked down the steps, every click of his shoes against the stage like a judge's gavel. He didn't look left or right until he passed me. He stopped briefly, placed a hand on my shoulder, then kept walking. No fanfare, no applause, just the sound of an empire cracking behind him. Mason still hadn't moved. His bourbon sloshed against the rim of his glass like it was trying to escape. His mouth opened, then closed. Nothing came out. And me? I just sat there, still, silent, a calm witness to the implosion he thought would never come. The collapse didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like vibrations, phones buzzing against tables like angry hornets, whispered curses, chairs scraping back too fast. It was polite chaos, corporate style, still wrapped in collared shirts and nervous smiles. But underneath, it was a full meltdown. The CEO tried. He strode up to the mic with the energy of a man sprinting toward a burning building, carrying a fire extinguisher full of confetti. "We want to thank Mr. Davies for his candor. Obviously, there are some conversations ahead, but we remain committed to transparency." He didn't even finish. The room was already looking at their screens. One by one, executives began excusing themselves. No eye contact, no excuses, just heads down, phones pressed to ears, stepping out like the building had a gas leak only they could smell. From my seat in the front row, I watched it unravel. Jessica texted me again. "Mason just got pulled into conference room 4. Legal, finance, and the COO are in there." Then, CEO's assistant is crying. And then, oh my God. I didn't reply. I crossed one leg over the other, slow and deliberate, and folded my hands in my lap like I was attending a particularly engaging opera. People I hadn't seen in weeks kept stealing glances at me. Some whispered, some looked away when I met their gaze. I wasn't just the ex-employee anymore. I was the axis around which the whole catastrophe now rotated. Mason came stumbling out of the back hallway 20 minutes later. His blazer was off, his shirt untucked. His face was pale, but his neck was crimson, like the embarrassment couldn't decide where to land. He looked around like he couldn't remember what room he was in. He saw me and stopped. We locked eyes. There it was, the flicker of realization. That it hadn't been a coincidence, that his little cost-saving stunt hadn't vanished into the HR void, that I'd told someone, that someone had listened, that he was now the liability. He started toward me, half a step, unsure, but someone from legal tapped his arm, said something urgent. He hesitated, then followed them instead. Good choice. The rest of the summit dissolved into fragments, people milling around like dazed survivors. Breakout sessions canceled. Happy hour scrapped. Brand banners quietly folded and wheeled out like flags after a lost battle. I stayed seated. Still hadn't said a word. Didn't need to. Across the room, I saw one of the senior partners arguing with the COO. Their voices were low but sharp. I caught a phrase, fiduciary breach, and saw the COO's mouth tighten like he'd just bitten into a lemon made of lawsuits. A junior analyst rushed by with a laptop, trailing sweat and panic. Mason didn't reappear, and the CEO, he vanished behind a locked door with 2 members of the board and a glass of something strong. The firm was in full-blown damage control. And me? I finished my club soda, stood slowly, and smoothed the fabric of my blazer. The lights above flickered slightly, like even the electricity knew something had ended. No apologies came, no last-ditch pleas or attempts to spin it into a misunderstanding, because deep down, everyone knew what had happened. A man had tried to save $27,000 by gutting someone he thought was disposable, and it cost him everything. The final moments were quiet, too quiet for what they meant. I sat in the front row, same seat, same posture, same glass of water. Only now it was half empty, and my hands no longer trembled. My wedding ring caught the light like it had been waiting for this exact spotlight. The ballroom had thinned out. No more clinking glasses, no more networking buzz, just murmurs, side eyes, the low drone of consequence humming through the air like an invisible siren. Robert stepped down from the stage without breaking stride. No folder in hand, no security detail, just himself, composed and surgical, like the speech hadn't just kneecapped a $20 million partnership. He walked directly to me, hand extended, not as a performance, not for show, but because it was finished, done. carved into stone. We shook hands. Simple. Final. No applause, no gasps, but I felt the eyes. Dozens of them. Maybe more. The moment burned itself into the fabric of that company like a scar you can't unsee. Mason reappeared 3 minutes later, but not alone. 2 men in suits flanked him, plain-faced, polite corporate cleanup crew. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't fighting. He looked hollow, stripped of everything but his name badge, which one of the men removed as they approached the exit. I caught the tail end of the conversation as they passed. For the board's decision, immediate termination, contractual misconduct. Mason didn't look at me. That was the final tell. Not defiance, not rage, just that quiet shame when a man realizes his throne was a swivel chair balanced on bad math and a borrowed ego. One of the women from HR, the same one who handed me my severance folder, stood near the exit, watching it unfold. When our eyes met, she blinked fast. She was trying to place me. She couldn't. I had become someone else, and I had, because for once, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of what happened. I wasn't chewing it or explaining it or trying to dress it up as some life lesson. I didn't feel vindictive or victorious, just complete. I stood, tucked my chair in, and nodded once to Robert. He returned it. No words, no lingering drama, just the shared understanding of a contract rewritten, not with ink, but with consequences. As I walked past the stage, someone whispered my name. I didn't stop. The air outside hit me like fresh paint, new, sharp, unfamiliar. The city moved on. Cabs honked. Shoes clicked on pavement. Somewhere, someone was firing off the first internal memo, trying to spin this disaster into a growth opportunity. But none of that mattered, because the truth was simple. Mason tried to cheat me out of $27,000. It cost him everything.